My name is Nguyen. I'm co-founder of Affluence, the company behind Matrix. In today's webinar, we'll be talking about how to successfully prioritize your tasks, projects, and emails using Matrix. So I'll try my best to share lots of best practices I've gathered over the years, and then also how to give you the 20% of the features in Matrix that would give you 80% of the value. Now, one of the things I like to start with is a quote that has inspired me this year. It's from Tony Robbins, and it's saying that productivity is not just about time management, it's about managing your misplaced attention. And one of the reason why I like this quote so much is because I feel like this is something I struggle with constantly, right? I have 1,000 things I have to do, and then yet at the same time, I don't have the resources to do all of them. So therefore, part of my time and part of my challenges here is how do I go and ensure that I'm spending time doing the right things? And so when you decide on the work that you have to do, you have to go and ensure that you're actually focusing your effort on the things that matter most. So with Matrix, one of the things that we're able to do is help you prioritize your tasks, projects, and email in such a way so that you can gain control of your time. And it helps at three different levels. The first is at the individual level, help you prioritize your most important tasks and emails. And at the same time, I think this is the most important thing that we can do as a software, which is to help ensure that you are successful at your everyday activities. What happens though is that as you use Matrix more and more, and some of your coworkers start using Matrix as well, you'll find that your teams will become a lot more aligned, ensuring that everyone's working towards the same goals and there's complete clarity as to what everyone's supposed to be working on. Now, as you use Matrix over a long period of time, one of the most amazing thing is that it actually creates a single source of truth. And so it helps everyone across the whole organization be aligned on the same page, and that yet at the same time be able to go and ensure that if someone leaves or if someone's no longer part of the organization, you have the full history of everything that's important to your team. Now let's talk about the fundamental idea behind Matrix. So there's a famous quote attributed to former President Eisenhower: "What is important is seldom urgent, and what is urgent is seldom important." Now, what I really like about this quote is that it helps us sort of understand that things are not single dimensional. Now, let me explain. Let me ask you, imagine if you have to write down the 15 things you have to do. What are the 15 things you have to do that's on your mind? Now, as you write down those 15 things, I'm going to ask you the follow-up question, which is, what are you going to work on first? Do you work on that first thing you wrote down? Or do you work on that last thing because it's at the bottom of your list and you work backwards? Or is it something arbitrary, random in the middle? And so as you can see, when we have a list, it is very, very difficult for us to decide where to focus our time. Not only that, imagine if there's a coworker who you work with all the time, and then they come up with their 15 things, and it's the exact same 15 things. But if you look side by side, what if those 15 things are in different orders? So then where do they work? Do they work at the top of the list or the bottom of the list? And so as you can see, that's the challenge with a single dimensional list. And so now you take those 15 tasks and you simply, for every single action item, you ask the question, is this important and is it urgent? So what happens is you take those 15 tasks and now you're putting them into various buckets. And this is what's called the Eisenhower Matrix. And essentially, the things that are important and urgent, that goes in quadrant 1. The things that are important but not urgent, that goes in quadrant 2, the medium priority. The things that are urgent but not important, they're actually low priority. And then lastly, you shouldn't have anything that's not important and not urgent. And so you have what's called your inbox, your catch-all, right? Where you put all your uncategorized tasks that need to be reviewed. Now, one of the most amazing thing about the Eisenhower Matrix is because it helps you sort of focus right away. So when we talk about that misplaced attention that I brought to you at the beginning, what happens is this: when I ever have lack of clarity as to what I should be working on, I can always go back to my Matrix and know exactly where I should be spending my time, which is quadrant 1 or quadrant 2. Now, one of the most amazing thing about the Eisenhower Matrix is that it sort of helps us sort of plan out our workflow as well. So I remember meeting a customer at a conference, and one of the things that he made me realize is that if you spend all your time in quadrant one in the high priority, you're doing it wrong. It means you're constantly firefighting, right? Instead, what you should really be doing is actually planning the things in quadrant two so then you can actually fight them before they become urgent. So as you walk through your journey, as you embark on this journey with Matrix and using our software to prioritize your work, either your personal life, your work, or your team priorities, just keep in mind that when you use the Eisenhower Matrix, you should be spending time on preparing for quadrant two over firefighting constantly. So if everything's in quadrant one, you're doing it wrong. So now, in that going back to that same exercise that we talked about in the beginning, when you take those 15 things and you put in these various buckets, guess what? You ask your coworkers to do the same thing. So now they take their 15 tasks and might be the same as yours. They put it into the buckets and suddenly you can compare notes. Are you aligned? Do you both agree everything in quadrant one? Do you agree on everything in quadrant two? Right. And what happens is that maybe 80% of the time you're aligned, but then once in a while you find some discrepancies, some disagreements, and guess what? That's where all the magic happens. That's when you can have those meaningful discussions with each other and ensure that everyone is actually truly aligned and walk away from whatever meetings or alignment meetings that you have completely be on the same page. So what happens is that the four quadrant Eisenhower matrix creates alignment because it forces you to prioritize from the beginning. I think that's the hardest part of using our software, by the way, is that when you create these tasks, you have to decide which bucket they go in, right? And there are a vast majority of people who struggle tremendously, and that's okay. Some of you might be struggling too, and some of you might say, you know what, I can't do this. I can't go and put into buckets. I have to put in a list, and it's going to be completely arbitrary. And guess what? Party Matrix isn't for everybody. But for those of you who actually spend your time prioritizing, what happens is that you'll realize that this 1 hour of work prioritizing your task makes such a big difference over the course of your week and over the course of your month because you're actually spending time on what matters most. So success from using Party Matrix isn't about necessarily finding out what everyone agrees on. It's discovering disagreements on what should be a priority when it isn't. So to step back for a little bit and talk about, the various use cases, if you're an individual and you're using Party Matrix, it's really about helping you focus on your key work because you can't do everything, right? So then let's spend your time doing the things that are in quadrant one and quadrant two. If you're in a team environment, it's about ensuring that everyone's on the same page so then everyone knows what are the things in quadrant one and in quadrant two. And that's pretty much it. That's all it is. And so Party Matrix as a software is just a fancy version of this, Eisenhower Matrix. You could do it on a piece of paper and it doesn't really matter. The only difference is we ensure that all of this information is available at your fingertips. So one of the things I want to share with you is some insights I've gathered over the past more than a decade working with thousands of customers. The first is that if everything's important, then nothing is important. And this is such a critical statement. I can't emphasize this enough. One of the problems that I've seen personally and also experienced is if you're a manager, right, and you go and you assign a task to your colleague, one of the things you tend to do is like, hey, this is super important. We got to get this done. And then 2 days later, you come back and it's like, hey, this is super important. We got to get this done. And so what happens is we tend to constantly say, hey, this is super important and it's urgent. We got to spend all our effort on this now. But you can't do that. If you're constantly doing that, then you're actually not helping anybody because you're actually distracting people from getting the most important work done. So my suggestion is if you're finding that more than 25% of your task is in quadrant one, then you're doing it wrong. And if you put something in quadrant one, you have to decide what are you taking out? What are you moving to the other quadrants, right? So if you experience this problem from the other side, which means your manager is constantly going to you and say, hey, this is important and this is urgent, then you push back and say, hey, by the way, let me show you my Party Matrix. Let me show you my priorities. I'm okay taking this on, but what are we taking out of it? And so I hope that when you look at Party Matrix, think of it as a way to communicate to others what is it that's important that you're working on. And then at the same time, it's a way to defend your time, right? Because if you don't prioritize your time, then somebody else will. The second thing is that important tasks should always have due dates and clear ownership. And so when you use Matrix, I strongly recommend that if you have tasks in quadrant 1 and quadrant 2, set due dates. Now, it's so trivial, it's so easy to say such a thing, but I find that a lot of people struggle with this because, they'll push back and say, wait a minute, I don't really know when this is due. Well, guess what? How can you plan for something to be urgent and important if you don't know when it's due? So it's okay to set a wrong due date and change it. But by putting a due date, then what happens is it starts occupying your calendar. And once it occupies your calendar, it occupies your mind share. And if it occupies your mind share, then you'll get to it. And if you don't do that, you'll never get to it. And so I have so many things I have to do. I always ensure that my most important tasks have due dates for that particular reason. And then ownership is really about saying who's responsible. And so in Matrix, you can only have one owner for every single task. That's the person who's responsible, right? There could be a lot of contributors, but having clear ownership is the ultimate way to make sure that people work on the right things. The third is don't track everything, track what matters most. And in fact, the reason I bring this up is because I've seen people, go into Matrix and sort of brain dump everything in, and then all they've done is really move from a sort of an unorganized list from another system into Matrix. Now you create that unorganized list in Matrix itself, right? And this actually goes hand in hand with email prioritization as well, because Matrix has a really powerful way to prioritize your email. Some people tend to go and say, wait a minute, I should prioritize all my emails in Matrix. And actually the answer is don't do that. I had a customer wanting to bring in tens of thousands of emails into Matrix, and my immediate reaction is that is such a terrible idea, because now you're just going to go and create this massive mess that really is, again, unprioritized. So instead, you should only focus on the emails that are really crucial, that needs clear delegation, clear due dates, and ensure that you don't miss those emails. And if you have tens of thousands of tasks that are all important and urgent, then something's wrong. And then the fifth aspect of it is the communication tool aspect of Matrix. So, I call it a task, project, and email management software, which it is. And there are plenty of software out there that prioritize those tasks and project and emails and so forth. But at the end of the day, I really think Matrix works best as a way to help you and others get alignment. An analogy that I like to bring up is, imagine if you walk around the office and there's a 4 quadrants that's floating above your head, and the 4 quadrants above your head tell exactly what your priorities are. What are the things you care about? What are the things that you're firefighting? What are the things you're working on next? Then you walk around the office and everyone else has the 4 quadrants floating above their head too. And suddenly you look at your manager and you're like, wait a minute, how come I thought this was important? Is it not? Right? You can see how you can have really meaningful conversations right away. So that's what I mean by communication tool. It's just, magically, if I could have everyone able to go around and able to see their priorities flowing above their head, then I think we can be so much more effective working together. And then the last thing here that I want to bring up is that it's okay to set your priorities and be wrong about it. And my suggestion is don't ever make assumptions that you are aligned with everybody else. And so when I use Matrix, I'm very explicit. I put the priorities down. I put exactly where they belong. And you know what? If I'm wrong, I'll move it to a different quadrant. And we shift Matrix back. We shift priorities back and forth constantly in Matrix, and that's part of the work. We spend so much time doing things, and a vast majority of us do not spend enough time thinking whether or not we should do it at all. So that's something to keep in mind as you work through your journey with Matrix. Okay, so I want to mention that our webinars are hosted and recorded and is on our website at affluence.com/webinar. So go there if you want to see the other webinars. But with that, let's go ahead and put this into practice. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you my demo Matrix here and walk you through how to put this into practice as you use Matrix. So here I have my Party Matrix open. As you can see, let me walk you through the structure of Party Matrix and how it works. On the left-hand side is my list of projects. What are projects? You can think of a project as a matrix, right? So, for example, I have a project called My Personal Priorities. This is my matrix of my personal priorities. When I click on that project, I see high priority, medium, low priority, and inbox. Well, guess what? My task I have to do is follow up with webinar participants. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is, like I said, if it's important task, I want to make sure I have a due date. So I'm going to say due tomorrow, 2 p.m., and I press enter. Now, what happens now is Matrix uses what's called natural language to set the due date for me. So the fact is, tomorrow, 2 p.m. is my local time, tomorrow, November 20th, 2 p.m. here. So Matrix set the due date for me. And so that allows me to create tasks very quickly. And I didn't have to click on a calendar. I didn't have to click on a clock, whatever it is. I just type it in the task name. Now, when I click the task, on the right-hand side, it's called the item details. And so the item details is just additional information I can add to this task. Now, some of the most important thing is, of course, ownership. Who's responsible, right? Is it me, or do I need to delegate to another person? Well, that's very easy. I can delegate it. And then to the right of this, I have due dates and I have reminders. So let me talk about that for a second. I mentioned to you how if you create a task and it's important, set a due date. But then what's the difference in due date and reminders? So let me give you an example. Imagine if you have something that's very important and it's due next Friday, but it's going to take you 3 days of work to do. If you set only a due date, next Friday will come around and you realize, wait a minute, I haven't gotten started. I can't get this done, right? So reminders is just a way to make sure that it's top of mind for you. Now, there's another reason why reminders are important, and that's because reminders helps ensure that something stays it takes up mind share. And so let me try to give you an example. You probably got a bunch of spam emails this morning, sales email or sales calls or whatever. And guess what? What happens is they do it on a cadence, right? They send it every week or 2 days, 3 days, etc. And you ignore it, you ignore it, you ignore it. But after like 7 emails, you're like, oh, okay, maybe let me take a look. Or I'm thinking of something. Suddenly you think about that spam email or that sales email that's been sent to you constantly. Why? It's because it's been top of your mind, even subconsciously. You weren't aware of it, but the fact that you've heard that name over and over and over again, it's top of mind for you. So when you're looking for something, suddenly you're thinking of that first. The same thing happens to your task. And so we're using the same strategy, which is if it's something that's important, set a recurring reminder. So then that task is top of mind for you. So then you're thinking about it to make sure you get it done. Okay. So for me, what I'd like to do is for my most important task, I set the due date. And then down here in the chat, I would say, remind me daily. And so now on a daily basis, I'll get a recurring reminder to work on this particular action items. In fact, when I follow up with important customers, enterprise customers, I always do in 1 month and then remind me monthly. And so even when the due date passes, not a big deal. I'll get a constant reminder to make sure I work on it. So you see here, I created the task in quadrant 4. Now I want to move it to quadrant 1. Everything is drag and drop in Matrix. So that's one of those things where, when I said to you, don't be afraid to reprioritize. You can see how easy it is, right? Move things between quadrant 1, 2, and 3. And again, don't have too many things in quadrant 1. Don't have too many things in quadrant 2. You have to make the conscious decisions on what it is you need to work on. Now, one thing I really like to do is when I have a lot of tasks, I like to resize the quadrants. So then when I start my day, I go and focus on quadrant 1, and then afterwards focus on quadrant 2. So it's just a very small trick, but it's actually pretty helpful because it allows you to sort of focus on just those key things. Now let's go back to the right-hand side. There's a couple of other things you can do in Matrix. As you can see, there's a lot of different options, but I just want to show you the most important ones. And now down here in the notes section, this is where you can add subtasks and you can add basic notes to the action item itself. So for example, maybe I have to go and say, get list of attendees, and then, write the message to customer, and then get reporting URL. Okay, so those are subtasks that I can do. And when I create those subtasks, Party Matrix track all of that for me. And then guess what? As I make progress on these subtasks, Party Matrix will update the progress here for me so I get a sense of how things are going. And then finally, in the resources section is where I can upload files, documents, or emails. So speaking of emails, let's switch gear just a little bit and talk about probably the number one reason why customers come to Party Matrix, which is prioritizing their emails. So if you happen to use Outlook, for example, Matrix is probably the best email prioritization system for Outlook. And I'll show you how that works. Let's just say you get an email that's important, but you can't answer it right now. So what do? If you're like most people, you flag the email, you leave it as unread, and that's fine. The only problem with that is if you have 50 flag emails and 50 unread emails, then what, right? Now you have another problem, which is, again, you have that long list of unread and flagged emails. So what happens instead is you can go into Party Matrix or go to Outlook, click on apps and install something called Party Matrix Turn Emails into Tasks, which is our extension for Outlook. And what it does is it lets you do the following. When I click on that option, I can choose prioritize email. And when I choose prioritize email, what I can do is actually I can turn this email into a task. And as you can see, Matrix automatically captured the subject of the email, and then I can choose what quadrant it goes in, what project it goes in. So imagine if this was a sales email, maybe I'll put in my sales project. If it's something that is for another department, I can put it in that particular project and delegate it to different people and so forth. So not only that, I can actually say, you know what, I need someone else to take a look at this email. And so instead of actually forwarding the email, right, the problem with forwarding emails is the following, which is if I forward to my coworker, one, I don't know if my coworker is going to be able to see it because maybe they also have 50 flag emails that they need to deal with. And then two, they don't have a sense of, is this important? Is this quadrant 1 or quadrant 3? Right. And then also, when is it due? Is it due today? Is it due in 2 weeks? And so instead, with Matrix, I'm able to convert the email into a task, organize it into a project, add a quadrant, and then set a due date. And now it's extremely clear to my coworkers on what it is they have to do and and why. So I simply click capture email. The task is created. On the right-hand side, I get the item details exactly like I get inside the main application. So what that means is I can add notes to it, right? Or I can add documents to it, et cetera, et cetera. And Party Matrix helps me stay organized with that. And then what happens is that after you convert an email into a task, Party Matrix automatically tag it inside Outlook. So then you know that this particular email has been prioritized. And so I'm able to make sure that, I end up answering this email. And then what happens is in the resources section for my coworker, it will actually upload the email file and they can access that, open the email file and respond to the customer. Now, what happens as well is sometimes you get an email and it's actually, you already have a task for it. So with Matrix, you can actually click on the same turn email to task, choose open Matrix, and you can actually attach the email to an existing task. You simply search for that task and click attach here. So what this does, it helps you stay organized, right? So again, going back to that same scenario, what if you get a follow-up email from a customer and you need to forward it to a team member? If you forward to somebody, guess what? Again, you create the second thread and no one knows what's the latest thing. It's just a huge mess in everyone's inbox because the problem with the email inbox is it's that long list that I told you about. It's the worst thing. And not only that, it grows so fast. I mean, I get so many emails on a constant basis. It is virtually impossible for me to go through every single email and ensure that I answer something from 3 weeks ago. So by using Party Matrix, I can ensure that this email is top of mind, that I'll get back to it, and it will remind me until I get that done. And similarly, it will remind my coworkers until they get it done because they know it's in quadrant 1 or quadrant 2 or whatever it is. But that's what the whole attaching an email to an existing task will do, which is to help you keep things organized in one centralized place. So now you can have documents, links, resources, files, drafts, whatever it is, and a whole conversation within one single task in Matrix, and it holds everything together. And so when we talk about prioritization, it really boils down to what I call context. And when I say context, what it means is, I have to do something, but what are all the information that I need around it, right? You can't do things in a void, out of an environment that is not well defined. So by putting all the emails and files in one centralized place, the other person has full context on what it is they need to work on. So I want to bring that up. Now let's go back to Matrix and let's talk through some of these other things. So one, you can see how that email that I actually created, the task from is right here. It's already synced over to my Matrix. There's a link to it. If I click on that, it opens the Outlook email. And then in the notes is the content from the email itself. So we talk a lot about the quadrants, and we talk about a lot about the various things you got to do within a particular project, right? But one of the things I want to show you right now is actually ways to look at the information within each of your projects. So at the very top here, the quadrant is front and center, but you can always switch to what's called the list view. The list view shows you everything you have to do. And what's nice about this is you can actually sort it by due dates, by creation date, and modify date, and so forth. So when I struggle with understanding what are all the tasks that's overdue, I like to go to the list view because I can sort by due dates and find everything that's overdue within this particular project. Then I have what's called the Kanban view. The Kanban view tells me all the things I have to do, the things that are in progress, and the things that are done. So if you're a project manager, you actually kind of like this Kanban view because you know that you've got to move everything from the left side to the middle, then to the right, right? And so this sort of gives you a sense of progress. One of the challenges that I think a lot of people face when they work and create tasks and so forth is that it feels like it's endless work, and that's true. I mean, for me, like I have tens of thousands of tasks in Matrix across almost 300 projects. So it never goes away, unfortunately, for better or worse. But what happens is the Kanban view sort of gives me a sense of progress. Like, okay, look at all the things that we've been accomplishing, right? That list gets so long, and then you get a sense of, you feel that, okay, we're actually moving the needle within any particular project. And then next, I get the calendar. Anything with a due date will show up here. One nice thing about Matrix is I can actually just work directly from the calendar view, for example. I can click on a task and I get the full right-hand side here. And guess what? I can just drag and drop tasks as well. And move them between calendar dates here, and Matrix will automatically set those due dates for me or change those due dates for me. So I strongly encourage you to play around with our drag and drop in the quadrants, in the calendar, etc. And don't be afraid to set those due dates, and don't be afraid to move those things around within the Matrix quadrants themselves. And then next to that, you have what's called the Gantt chart. And so the Gantt chart is actually, let me explain sort of the difference between Gantt chart and the calendar view. The calendar view is good for planning like your week or maybe even your month. But the Gantt chart is good for planning out quarters and years. So when you use the Gantt chart, you can actually zoom out here, and now you can suddenly see what are the things I have to do, in February of next year or 6 months from now, et cetera. So those are different perspectives. So as you can see inside Matrix, you can actually look at all the data that you have depending on your specific needs, right? Do I need to know what are the things I got to work on today, or do I need to know what are my top priorities? And so you can use these different views to find the information that's most relevant to you at this moment. Now let's talk about projects for a second, since I mentioned project a couple of times, and I mentioned how every project has its own set of quadrants. So what are projects? So there's at least 3 types of projects. The first is what I called a persistent project. It's a project that lasts forever, right? So for example, my personal priorities. It's one of those things where I'll add more to it, and then I'll get some things done, then I'll add more to it again, and so forth, right? So for us, we have a project for every single one of our software version as well as platform. So that project will never go to zero. We're constantly adding features, bug fixes, and so forth, and so it never finishes. Then you have a second type of project called transient project. These are projects that have a start date and an end date. A construction project you have something that starts today and it finishes in 18 months. So in Matrix, you can have those different types of projects. So when I click on a project, on the right hand side, I get now what's called the project details. So for example, I can actually customize the quadrant names. I can actually customize the colors. And so it allows me to sort of change the project and customize it in such a way that makes sense for the type of project I'm working with. And then not only that, I can choose what team members I want to have in this particular project. So for example, maybe if I go to my weekly staff meeting project, there's additional people here. And as you can see, I actually changed the quadrant names as well as the quadrant colors, right? And so now when you create a project in Matrix, you can decide, okay, do I create a persistent project or a transient project? But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. It's just a way for you to organize that information. One of the things I want to mention is don't be afraid to create a lot of projects. If you're working on a lot of different things, create a project for things for the right context. So let me give an example. If you manage 10 different manufacturing plants across the country, you can't put everything in one project. It's just too hard, right? You're going to lose context. And so you should create a project for each of the plants that you work with. Or if you're a business owner, create a project for each of your departments. So then you know exactly what are the priorities within each of those departments, and then you have the right people within each of those projects. So one of the things that I strongly recommend for everyone here who's listening is one, create a project called weekly staff meetings. So if you're a manager, definitely create this project, and then afterwards invite your team members so then they can go into Matrix and then have one single quadrant, one single matrix to look at to know what are the top priorities for the team. And then what happens is that during your staff meeting, your weekly staff meeting, simply project this on the screen, right? What's really useful about this exercise is that it helps everyone focus on what are the highest priority within the group at any point in time. One of the mistakes I see people make all the time in their weekly staff meeting is sort of just like, go around and just get everyone to give a status update without any structure. Well, guess what? People will start talking about the things that are top of mind, and there's a lot of recency bias. And what I mean by that is that, you're going to find, if you just track what people say, you're going to find that if you don't use something like Matrix to prioritize your conversation, people will talk about the things that just happened this morning or the things that happened yesterday. Why? Is because it's recent and it's top of mind, right? So they're going to ignore the super, super important task from 2 weeks ago because there's been no progress. But you don't want to do that. As a manager, you want to ensure that we move the needle on those things in quadrant one. So that's why I strongly recommend you projecting this onto the screen, and you're going to find that your conversation is a lot more meaningful and so much more productive because you ensure that you talk about those Q1 and Q2 items. And guess what? If you need to talk about something else, then move them up, right? Or if something becomes no longer important, you can move them away. Now, one thing that you see here in my weekly staff meeting project is that actually I have these tasks that they themselves are different projects. So when you manage a team, those team members might have projects within Matrix as well. So with Matrix, what you can do is you can create actually what's called dashboard projects. So as you can see here, I have a task here, but this task itself is a project. And so you can say office relocation to Boston. There's a little go to project icon. I click on that and it takes me to a whole new project. And then what happens is, imagine finalized office lease here is itself a project. I simply right click on this and I say convert to project. And now it'll take a task in Matrix and convert that into its own matrix. And so with Matrix, you can actually build this cascading layers of priorities where a single priority itself has its own set of priorities, right? Now, what happens is that you can actually have, if you have an existing project, you simply right click on the project, copy the link, and then you just paste that link right here. And then you go create a task, you paste that link and you press enter. And then what happens is it'll create a task that linked to that particular project. Now, the reason I bring this up is, for those of you who manage complex projects and you have cascading priorities and so forth, Matrix gives you infinite flexibility in how you pull that information up. And what's really neat about this too is like the Gantt chart, when you go to the Gantt chart, it will inherit all those information from those sub projects. So now you have one centralized place to plan all your resources. Okay, so I've talked about projects. I've talked about the quadrants, the views. I've talked about tasks. I've talked about email prioritization. Let's talk about how do you decide what to work on every single day? Well, so that's the hard part, right? So what happens when you log into Matrix, at the very top here, you see something called the home view. The home view is where you start your day. So when you go to the home view, you get these things called alerts. And essentially alerts are tasks that requires your attention. So for example, you have something that's due, you have something that has a reminder that triggered, someone assigned you a task, someone mentioned you in a task, et cetera, et cetera. So your goal when you use Matrix is to go to the alerts here, take a look, what are the things that's important? And then as you click through them, this list goes away and you'll get to that inbox 0. Now, sometimes you might just need to clear it all. And so at the top right here, you can clear all the old stuff. So for example, if I go on vacation and I come back, I'm going to have so many tasks. And sometimes it's easier just to clear them. So then I have a smaller slate to work with. And then what happens now is that as I go through this, Matrix actually let me filter. So if people assign you a task, it's going to say new assignments. So when you see that, those are the things you really care about, right? Because that means someone asked you to do something, make sure you get it done. So if you're a if you're an individual contributor and you get assigned a lot of tasks, make sure that you check that new assignment tab, every time you use Matrix. Now, the other thing you can do in this view is you go to what's called the agenda. So the agenda tells you what are the things you have to do today, tomorrow, and what are the things that are overdue. If you go to the agenda, it actually aggregates information across all your projects. So it makes it very convenient because you're not clicking through every project to know what it is you need to work on. Now, in the agenda view, you actually have two choices. If you click on the top right here, you can choose items I own or items I follow. If you're an individual contributor, you want to choose items I own. These are items that are assigned to you. So then your agenda is very, very straightforward. It's narrow. It shows you the tasks that you have to do today, the tasks you have overdue, the tasks you have to do this week. But if you're a manager, you probably assign a lot of tasks to people. So you want to choose items I follow. So this gives you the agenda, not just for yourself, but for all the coworkers that work with you for tasks that you assign to them. So it's very, very useful for managers to be able to manage resources, ensure that that things are not falling behind, and so forth. So those are sort of the two ways where the two things you should be doing every single day when you use Matrix to make sure that you plan your time accordingly. Now, I showed you the views within every single quadrant, but one of the things that I want to show you now is actually what's called global views. So I mentioned to you how I have almost 300 projects and I have tens of thousands of tasks. Obviously, I cannot click through all my projects and to find out what it is I need to do, right? So there's a couple of things I want to show you real quick. Once you have more than 5 or 6 projects, you can right click on project and you can choose to pin a project, and that moves it to the very top of the list. So if you work with a lot of other people, you find that this feature to be extremely important. Then you can also star a project. And so if you click on a project, you can star it, and that's a way to tell everybody that you work with that this is an important project. But now what happens is I can go to what's called the calendar view. Then this is called the global calendar. And instead of actually clicking through each project to look at the calendar, I go to global calendar here. I can select what projects I care about. And now I get the calendar for everything. And it's one centralized view, and it is super useful to know what everyone's working on, what are the top priorities, what are the things going to be behind schedule, and so forth. Then I can click on this filter and say, you know what? Show me only the things that are quadrant 1 material or quadrant 2, right? So now you can actually see the calendar for all the tasks that are important and urgent across all of your projects. Just think about how powerful that is just as a view, especially if you're a manager or you're a director or you're an executive and you have a large team. Guess what? There's no way you can go and filter through all these different projects and so forth. And that's what our filtering system is designed to do. It helps you narrow down and know exactly what you need to work on. And then furthermore, you can even select specific users So then you can see what their calendar is across all of these projects. So that's the calendar view. The same thing happens with the Gantt chart view. The Gantt chart view here is the global Gantt chart. So it helps you see what everyone's calendar is like when it spans across months and even years. And so as you can see, I can zoom out here and I can see resources being assigned tasks all the way through 2027, 2028, and so forth. And if I go to the search view, it actually shows me everything in a list. Now, one cool trick I want to show you is what's called a multi-select option. So imagine if you have a coworker that's going on vacation and you need someone else to take over the task. Well, you go to the search view, simply click on filter, right? And then you can group by projects, and then you select the coworker. And now suddenly I can see all of Remy's projects that's organized across all these different all the tasks across all these different projects. And guess what? I go to multi-select here. I start selecting these items. And then I can go to this drop down again and I can do multiple things. I can, one, change the owner to another person. So if I go ahead and do that, and now suddenly I've just reassigned all those tasks across all of these different projects to a different person. And guess what? They have complete context on what it is they need to do because they can click on the task and see all the details. But if I go to the same drop down, guess what? I actually have a lot more things I can do. I can build an email reports or I can export this as CSV. So these are all the things that Matrix will allow you to do as a way to manage these tasks. And so when it comes to scale, Matrix is phenomenal for helping you prioritize literally thousands of action items. And so you don't have to be afraid of, managing all these different things. Matrix helps you essentially narrow down to exactly what you need to do. And then you can zoom back out again and still have full control and full understanding of what the priorities are across the entire team. Okay, so that's the search view. Now there's one neat view in Matrix that is very unique, and that's called the one-on-one view. So I talk about, projects and so forth, but the one-on-one view is about people. And so what happens here as a manager, I want to know what are the things that are my coworkers are working on, right? So when I have a one-on-one meeting, I simply click on one-on-one, select one of my direct reports, and now suddenly I can see all the things I have in common with Eugenia across all of Matrix. And so when I have a meeting, a one-on-one, I simply sort by due dates and let's start talking about all the things that are overdue. Or I can talk about sort by modified. What are all the things that we're recently working on? And then not only that, I can easily reprioritize these things as needed, or I can do the multi-select, change the due dates, create an email report, whatever it is I got to do. So this is so useful for one-on-one meeting because if you've done a lot of one-on-one meetings, one of the things you'll find is that people need help. Your job as a manager is to ensure that you're essentially eliminating barriers, you're eliminating blockers, and so forth, right? Well, guess what? When you go to the one-on-one view, you'll see the blockers real fast because there's going to be these tasks that are overdue. You're going to see these things that haven't been modified in a while, or progress got stuck. So by going to the one-on-one view and you select the person, you truly know what are the things that you can do to make the biggest impact. And one of the beauty of this is, again, I don't have to click through every project, right? I don't have to click through all these different quadrants and so forth. I simply go to the one-on-one and go to the person and know exactly what I got to do to help them. One neat thing is I can actually work directly from here. I can click on add share task and it automatically create a task assigned to the other person and adds me as a follower. So I know, I'll get a status update when there are changes. So one of the things I sort of want you to realize as you're looking at all of this is that you can actually work with Matrix from all these different views, depending on, what makes you most comfortable in prioritizing your work, right? So if you like to work with people, that's what the one-on-one view is for. If you like the Eisenhower Matrix, that's what the quadrant view is for. If you're calendar-centric, that's what the calendar view is for. Matrix lets you work from any of those views for either a single project or across all projects simultaneously. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you Microsoft Teams real quick. So if you happen to use Microsoft Teams, one of the things you can do is you can actually install Matrix and then pin it on the left-hand side. So if you use Microsoft Teams, this is almost no-brainer. It just makes it easier for you to access Matrix. You don't have to go to your application. But Matrix works in iPad, iPhone, Mac, Windows, Android, web. So if you do want to install Matrix on the desktop, then you can do that as well. But one thing I want to show you real quick is in the Microsoft Teams, you can actually go to the add a tab here, choose Matrix, and then add that one-on-one tab right here. So what happens is that you can create this one-on-one in the conversations you have with every single one of your coworkers. So this allows you to pretty much access the one-on-one view for all the people that you work with without even going to Matrix itself. Makes it very convenient for you to prioritize work or have a conversation with somebody or just following up and getting a status update on those most important work. Okay, so let's try to wrap up and let's talk about the things that are important for you today. So a couple of things. The first, when you use Matrix for the first time, I recommend you create a project for personal priorities and a project for your weekly staff meeting. So to create that project, simply click on projects here, choose create project. You can choose a blank project, or you can choose some from our existing templates. But that's very, very straightforward. Simply create the project name here, choose a color if it matters, and then that allows you to start organizing right away. So having that personal priorities project is a way for you to quickly write down the things that you care about, and you'll find that immediately you have more clarity on what it is you need to work with. Then for your staff meeting project, invite the appropriate people. So then when you have that staff meeting this coming week, you can bring that up and say, hey, these are our current priorities. What am I missing? Right? Add those missing items and so forth, and then prioritize them. And now next week, you'll have a very good sense on what it is that you need to work on. Are people working on the right things and so forth? Now, once you get more comfortable with all that, then you can start creating some of these other projects. But my suggestion to you is focus on the things that matter the most. You know, my personal take is don't put everything in Matrix on day one. You might get overwhelmed. Don't do that. When you create tasks, make sure that you assign the task to appropriate people. Make sure you set those due dates, set those reminders. It's very, very helpful because that's how you can ensure that you're working on the right things. When you log into Matrix, make sure you check out the home view and work through those different tasks and so forth. Because if you set something as important and urgent and you have a due dates and you have a reminders for it, make sure you get them done, right? That's sort of the whole goal of all of this. So really, that's it. There's 1,000 other features in Matrix that exist, but in my honest opinion, they don't matter. I mean, if you can just prioritize your work into these few projects and you're actively marking things as done, delegating, and so forth, that's all you got to do. And I think you'll get a really good grasp on what Matrix can do real quick. And then from then on, you can go ahead and expand your usage to capture all your other use cases. But one thing I can tell you is that Matrix works great for 10 tasks and works just as great for 10,000 tasks. So don't be afraid to expand the usage of Matrix to capture everything that you need because it has the full capabilities to handle all of those things. Okay, let's go back to my presentation here. A couple of tips to shortcut your success. If you're a manager, create a project for your team staff meeting and screen share during your meetings. That's very important. I highly recommend doing that screen share. It's a very simple exercise, but it'll help everyone be on the same page. And the most importantly, when you create a task live at that moment during your meeting and you assign to the person, 2 weeks later, when you go back and you have a conversation, they can't go and say, oh, I didn't write that down, right? They know exactly what they got to do, and it's very, very clear. So I recommend that if you have tasks to create it then during the meeting on that project, that screen share with everybody. Make sure you share that project with everybody else. So when they go back to their desk, they have that full access to those priorities and you're all on the same page. You can disagree with each other, that's okay, but you're on the same page. If you're managing multiple sites, create a project for each site's locations and dashboard, a dashboard project to oversee all of it, where that's where you can create a project from a task allowing you to have it be very, very organized, and you can drill down, drill up, or whatever it is you got to do. If you have specific training programs or initiative, you can actually create a template from Matrix. So what happens with Matrix is if you create a series of tasks, you can actually turn that into a template. So then instead of actually creating those tasks over and over again, when you create a project, simply choose from your own templates, and Matrix will replicate all those tasks. You simply set a start date, and it'll automatically set a start date for all of your action items as well. It'll save you so much time and effort. If you're a business owner, create a project for each of your departments. That's a very, very powerful way for you to be on top of everything, right? Sometimes, one of the biggest challenges that we all face is just having the bandwidth to be on top of everything. It's just not possible. I mean, there's just so many things to do and so forth. But by creating different matrix, different matrices for these different departments and so forth, you now have one centralized place for you to see the information. But guess what? You can see exactly the things that matters, which is the stuff in quadrant 1 and quadrant 2. So what that does is essentially it helps you filter out all this noise that are not important. And so this applies if you're a business owner, applies if you're a manager, it applies even if you're an individual, just handling all the stuff that you've got. I think the most important takeaway that I hope you get from this is that the whole point of the quadrant system is that it helps you sort of differentiate all the things that's noisy, like essentially the things that are urgent but not important, from the things that are important and urgent, where you should really be spending your time. And then if you're an individual contributor, create a project for your goals, for your promotion request. One of the things I didn't show you was that if you go to that list and simply select yourself and then change the filter to finish items, guess what? You can build a report that shows you exactly all the things that you've accomplished. It is so useful when it comes to performance reviews, where you have to paste in all the work that you've done. Guess what? Instead of spending a whole day digging through your emails or your spreadsheet or whatever to come up with the list that you've done, Matrix will build that list for you within seconds. Super useful in the long term to help you sort of meet your promotion request. Okay, what to do now? Make sure you sign up for Matrix, install the Teams and Outlook app if that's applicable. Otherwise, download the desktop app, because Matrix we have native Mac and Windows app, and that sort of helps you really be on top of things because the app's always there. Create a project for your top priorities. Make sure you set those due dates and reminders. Ask your colleagues to also prioritize their tasks, and then just compare notes. And then in terms of best practices, I highly recommend 1 hour each week, either at the beginning or at the end, to review your priorities. And honestly, as I said earlier, we spend so much time doing things. We spend so little time thinking about whether or not we should do them or not. And that's all I'm asking you to do. Spend time with Matrix to help you decide whether you should do something or not, right? Then you go do it. So that's what this is all about. And then lastly, compare your Matrix with your coworkers every week. Honestly, it's a very simple exercise. Again, you can put that as part of your 1 hour check-in or whatever it is. But by doing that simple exercise, you can ensure that you're working on the right things. And it's like course adjustment, right? When you drive a car, you don't go and drive sort of blindly and hoping that you're aligned with your coworkers. Instead, by doing this weekly exercise of comparing Matrix, it helps you fine tune and ensures that you're going at the same pace in the same direction as them on a continuous basis. That's all it is. Okay, that's all I've got for you. There's a lot more to learn in Matrix, and I hope that as you use the software, you'll pick up some of the other features that really matters to you. But if there's any questions right now, please feel free to put them in the chats. Otherwise, you can send me a message to hi@affluence.com. And I appreciate your time, and thank you for listening.